It just keeps getting worse for the Philadelphia 76ers, with the chances of ever seeing the big three of Paul George, Joel Embiid, and Tyrese Maxey sharing significant time on the floor together seeming increasingly improbable. We do have a couple new updates on Paul George's situation after it was announced that he did undergo arthroscopic knee surgery in the offseason here. I want to dive into exactly what ESPN Shams Charania is saying, why I think there is some hard-hitting reality that we're all beginning to arrive at for the state of the Sixers team, and what to make of this situation from here. Now, obviously, this is coming on the heels of the initial report from Shams Charania, which states Philadelphia 76ers star Paul George underwent a successful arthroscopic procedure on his left knee Monday to treat an injury suffered during a recent workout, a team official tells ESPN. George will now begin a rehab program and be reevaluated prior to the start of training camp. So we knew this already, but Shams Charania did hop on ESPN today to provide a bit more clarity on the situation. And the most telling quote that he did put forth here was this, captured by Kyle Neubeck here, saying, quote, "He will be reevaluated at the start of the upcoming training camp, but I am told both sides will be cautious with him." And that does lead me to believe that it is more likely than not that Paul George may not be ready for game one of the season here. Now, we did get a bit more information from Shams in this report here, basically confirming here this is not anything structural. This is more of like a cleanup style of surgery. And what does seem to be the case here is that both the Sixers and Paul George evaluated this is likely going to be a lingering thing if he does not treat it. So the decision was made that the best path forward for both sides here is for Paul to get this taken care of now, hopefully recover throughout the offseason, and then be himself again next season. The phrasing that is being used is that they want the best chance of Paul George getting back to the full version of himself, which we obviously have not seen in Philadelphia just yet. Now, to reflect on the Paul George that we did see last year, I do want to start with the stats that he put forth to the table here, that across 32.5 minutes per game, averaged just 16.2 points, 5.3 rebounds, 4.3 assists, shot 43% from the field, and 35.8% from beyond the three-point arc there. That is not the Paul George that the Sixers hope they sign, or really who we've seen in the NBA for the past decade. And what I think is, I guess, adds a little bit of an interesting storyline to this is it felt to me, and I certainly have operated like this, that it was just presumed that we would get a bounce back Paul George season. And I'm not saying I believe that the full max scale guy that they signed is still in there, that I think there's a real chance that they missed the boat on him being that version of himself, but I was pretty confident that Paul George was going to be at least better than was the case last year. And to acknowledge his stats with Joel Embiid, which of course is the biggest storyline and driving force why he's in Philadelphia in the first place, not quite flattering here. That Paul George, in the 18 games that he played with Joel Embiid as a duo here, Paul averaging 14.2 points per game, 5.1 rebounds, and 2.1 steals, did shoot 41, 31, and 79% shooting splits here. That 31% from three especially jumps out to me. And then Joel Embiid in those same matchups, that he's averaged 23.5 points per game, 8.0 rebounds, 1.0 blocks, shooting splits of 44%, 30%, and 91% from the free throw line. Not exactly what you expect from the MVP candidate, the former MVP here in Joel Embiid here. Now, obviously, this lineup was constructed, this roster was constructed with this big three concept in mind, with Paul George, with Joel Embiid, and with Tyrese Maxey. Now, the problem with kind of the thought process of that, and we've seen the NBA sort of zag in the other direction here, is so much of your salary cap is directly committed to those three players. They have to deliver as the stars they're signed to be, otherwise the team begins to unravel, and availability is right at the top of the list here. We're starting to get some wild takes that I understand where they're coming from here, such as Tim McMahon coming on ESPN today saying, quote, "They are built on a foundation of two max players who might be the two worst valued contracts in the NBA." Now, this is not a time where I can be running a victory lap or sticking up or grandstanding for Paul George or Joel Embiid's contract. Those are intimidating numbers to be looking down the barrel. I will note and point out here that the Bucks are literally paying Damian Lillard to go away, and Bradley Beal still exists in the NBA. But nonetheless, I do get Tim McMahon's point here, that if you're not going to have these guys on the floor, what do you really do? Now, my answer to that is I think the youth movement is in full swing here, that I think there is good reason to be optimistic about the future, that while this is a current problem that they are dealing with, and for the next 3 seasons, as they have $100 million annually committed to these two players combined here, it's an issue. But look at the next generation. I still believe that Tyrese Maxey will continue to progress, and I'm confident he will be on the floor at a regular rate next season. Jared McCain, I am certain will recover to the fullest extent from his meniscus surgery. And by the way, looking quite impressive out there at the practices in the Summer League from what I hear there. Looking automatic, just like Jared McCain that you expect from a shooting standpoint. He's going to be just fine, and I do hope we get a full season with him. And VJ Edgecombe, Who knows if he can make an impact? I think one of the bigger storylines here is the opportunity is fully on display for VJ Edgecombe to go out there and take it. And if I've noted anything about Edgecombe to this point, I like his chances of doing exactly just that. So there is a bit of an underlying youth movement that I think there is reason to be optimistic about, but nonetheless, this is still orchestrated around Joel Embiid and Paul George. And just for the sake of going through this before I shifted back to the immediate outlook here, for the conversations about just trade these guys, that you can't win anything until Joel Embiid's out of here, you got to give up on the Paul George contract here. My biggest pushback would be who is taking them, that it takes two to tango in any sort of trade. And I understand that theoretically it sounds great to just get them off the books, get them out of here, they need to move on. Sure, that does make some sense to me. I understand where you're coming from there, but what are the logistics of actually making that happen? Who in their right mind, based on the information that is currently in front of us about each of these players, is signing on to pay Joel Embiid $70 million in 2029? I just don't see an NBA team taking that chance, in particular where we're seeing the effects of the CBA really break across the league and be more prevalent than ever before. I think, unfortunately, the Sixers are married to these two players, and they're going to have to deal with the ups and downs, and there's a lot more downs than it does seem to be the case. Now, to look at Paul George last season, and the injury issues that he did ultimately deal with, I've been a little bit sympathetic to Paul from the stance of he never got a chance to get his legs under him. This guy suffered the knee hyperextension in preseason and re-injured it very early in the season, that he didn't really get that time to settle in and find himself within his new teammates. But to highlight the injuries that he did deal with here, making $49.2 million last year, that he missed 15 games with the adductor injury, which is ultimately what ended his season there. 10 games for the groin issue, 8 games for a knee injury, 5 games for a finger issue, 2 games for injury management, and 1 for an ankle there. That is a lot of games missed for a guy that is being paid a pretty penny here. And I did want to pull up this quote from Morey, which I think is especially interesting now that we know this information. And I'm going to give Morey the benefit of the doubt that this happened before Paul's injury ultimately did go down. I don't think we have the full clarity. I know that it was mentioned Monday in Sham's report here, but I think it's a bit more fluid than that is directly leading on to say. But these quotes from Morey I did want to pull up. Shout out to Sixers Adam here, who says, Shams, quote, "I'm told Paul George suffered an injury during an on-court workout last week, and it led to him visiting the doctor on Friday. Says caution is expected." Daryl Morey was asked about George on Friday, but did not comment on how he was doing physically. Here's the exchange. The reporter: "Where do you think Paul is at, mentally and physically? He had a tough year last year. Now, I think that he wants to bounce back. What's the pathway to that, and where do you think he is with that?" And Daryl said, quote, "Yeah, he's been really excited to get back out there. I know he really wants to show Philadelphia fans what he can do. He didn't feel like he was able to do that last year, so I know he's very optimistic and excited to get out there and show what he can do." So pretty much a guarded and vague answer from Daryl Morey. I don't know if he deserves the benefit of the doubt at this point in the game, but I am going to give it to him and think he either didn't know the full context of the situation and didn't want to say anything, which I do think checks out from the timeline standpoint, or he may not have even known at all, that this might have gone completely over his head. It does seem that there is not exactly the 10 out of 10 communication internally with the Sixers organization, pretty much across the board, so I'm not ruling that out either. Now, a couple other factors that I did want to pull in here, and as I pull up this graphic here, we got this quote from Shams saying that they will be cautious with him. We also have gotten from Joel Embiid about he will be ready around training camp here. So I do wonder, what is the starting lineup, or what is the team that takes the floor when it is opening night? Ultimately, it is too early to be answering those questions here, but I wonder if the Sixers are going to try and phrase this as their bring them along, their ramp up process that they're going to design this year is holding these guys back at the start of the season. I wonder if they let the young guys run at the early stages of the season and then try and bring in Paul George and Joel Embiid as almost like a catapult this team into contention. I don't really think that's sustainable. I don't really think that's going to produce positive results, but I do wonder if that's where the organizational mindset is at here. Is that something that makes sense? Ultimately, I guess the timeline of recovery will tell us a lot more about this, that I'm sure we'll get plenty of updates, or knowing the Sixers, maybe even not on their status as the season gets closer. But just not ideal across the board here. The Paul George experience has been a massive failure in Philadelphia to this point. I do hope that he can step foot on the floor to at least change that to this point. But when you run back the injury track record for this guy, it doesn't make me feel much better about it. That I did want to leave that one off for a little bit of optimism in this video. But between the leg breaks and all the things that he's dealt with throughout his career, I do wonder if at the same kind of conversation we're having about Joel Embiid's body catching up with him, I hope we're not looking down the same barrel with Paul George, because that is a pretty concerning outlook here. For the short term, let's celebrate some of these young guys and hope for the best from an injury perspective. There is still a lot to get excited about for the Sixers season, as I do think they're beginning to turn a new page and bring in a new identity, a new youth movement here in Philadelphia. So I'm going to be fired up and talking about it from start to finish, but would like if the Sixers world is just a bit more normal than has been the case really since I've started talking about this team here. So we'll see what happens from here, but appreciate you guys for tuning in this video. If you have not already, make sure you're smashing the subscribe button on this video here. Drop a like on the, subscribe to the channel, like on the video, drop your comments below. I'll be back talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.